I'd like to offer a reading from Mark's first chapter. It's a story about Jesus with a rather remarkable encounter. Somewhat amazing story. It goes like this. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, Jesus entered the synagogue and taught them. And they were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, throwing him into convulsions and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this, a new teaching with authority? He commands even unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So ends the reading of God's holy word. Invite us to pray. Eternal source of light and understanding, reservoir of blessing for all of life, we turn to you as we listen to this somewhat remarkable story from Mark. We don't usually encounter language like unclean spirits, O gracious one. But we know that though the language may be different, the reality is the same across all time. So we ask that you would open our minds, center our hearts, and make us receptive to hear that great and saving truth that you have for each one of us. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. Well, I know you've all heard the story about the little kid who went to church for the first time. Afterward was asked by his grandpa what he thought. He replied, "I liked the music, but the commercial was too long." And no doubt, the commercials can drag on a bit. I'll try not to. But as a child of the television age, and hence something of a student of commercials, I can say that commercials usually don't drag, not too much, if the product that they're selling is both useful and available. But they have to be both, useful and available. For example, here's a product that may be available at some local yard sales when it gets warmer, but maybe not much use. One of those machines that rewinds your VHS. Might be handy, but probably not that handy. On the other hand, something that might be very useful, but maybe not very available. Having my own helicopter might be very useful in terms of shortening my commute from Naples to Bristol. But even with this wonderfully generous pay raise that you gave me this year, I think it's a little bit out of my reach. Not to mention just how disturbing it would be to the entire neighborhood every time I came to work. I think, believe it or not, this digression has something to do with what I'm going to talk about. It's this pithy passage that we heard from Mark, the story about Jesus, that is very pragmatic, in that he is offering something very useful and very available. This commercial, if you will, is rapidly followed up with some very tangible help. So it's no surprise, especially in a gospel like Mark that tends to move along about like a race car, that once again we hear Jesus getting down to business immediately. First, he heads right into the epicenter of the faith community, into the synagogue, and he seizes the moment and the pulpit to speak with authority, we hear. This commercial seems to really grab people. And it's very hard to picture anyone dozing off in the moment. And then, almost immediately, Jesus encounters every preacher's nightmare. The challenge of having to live your words right on the spot. A man with an unclean spirit accosts Jesus, calling him out, as it were, even before Jesus had a chance to get into the social hall and have some of the Wegmans cake. Frankly, I think it's a bit inhumane. But anyway, the needs of the moment required that Jesus act, that he jump right on it and move from talking to talk to walking to walk. Now, before he ever does anything with this man with the unclean spirit, I think it's interesting to notice that the unclean spirit recognizes him. While some of the folks in the congregation may still be scratching their head as to this guy from Nazareth, the evil spirit seemed to know very well who he was. One of the writers, the commentators I read, William Abraham, says, it's as if radical evil has a way of immediately discerning the presence of good. I think we see that kind of thing all the time, though, really. People that we might call bad actors get real squirrely in the presence of someone speaking the truth. Somehow they know that the jig is up. Very quickly, justifications start to fly, defenses shoot up, and fingers start pointing back at the truth teller. You see it in 4-year-olds all the time. And anyone who happens to be acting like a 4-year-old. Remember that phrase? It all started when he hit me back. That one has to sink in a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, I had a dental appointment this past week, and in the waiting room are all these wonderful pictures of people with glorious smiles. Those pictures bother me, because I know that my teeth aren't as pretty and as strong as theirs, and in just a few minutes I'm going to find out just how not strong they are. And how much it'll cost to fix it. There's nothing quite so intimidating and sometimes infuriating as an ideal or someone who holds up an ideal. True confession, that's one of the reasons I don't like being introduced to people as a minister. People hear minister or reverend, and often as not, they make all kinds of assumptions about me, and for whatever reason, they end up feeling guilty. And I don't have to open my mouth. I don't say a word. And nothing I can say about my own foibles and flaws will allay their fears one bit. So if people who meet a regular old reverend start to scan their memory banks for their last cuss word, imagine what happens when real evil encounters real good like Jesus. Evil starts to get real antsy. And so it says to Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, what have you to do with us? Notice this, it's the oldest trick in the book. Try to gain power by using someone's name. You've probably heard it, I have, on the news all the time. When an interviewer puts an especially tough question to the guest will choose that moment to address the interviewer by name. Well, Bill, as though they're putting the interviewer kind of in a lower position, putting them in their place. It's a power play, especially when people get nervous. One of the tricks of the trade used to maintain the upper hand. And I suppose, in all fairness to the man with the unclean spirit, when you're encountering the Son of God, you will pull out every trick in your bag. But Jesus doesn't flinch. And he doesn't do what a whole lot of people in authority do when they find themselves in a tight spot. He doesn't just throw a whole lot more words at them. I think historically people in authority have often leaned heavily upon their words, and sometimes only their words. You know where I'm going next. When Dorothy asks the Scarecrow how he can talk without a brain, he responds, "I don't know, but some people without brains are doing an awful lot of talking." On the other hand, there's great credibility, great authority when words are linked to action. I still get a kick out of old pictures I see, and I'm going to cover both sides here, of either Jimmy Carter or George W. Bush with a hammer in their hand at a Habitat for Humanity project, especially when it looks like in this wedding. Whatever their politics, the nails are bipartisan and the house is going up. It's activated love. And in that same spirit of activated love, Jesus hops to it when the need arises. Just as he'd been called out by the Spirit, he in turn calls out the Spirit, which turned out to be not real pretty. I think if we'd been there witnessing it. Banishing evil often comes with convulsions of one kind or another and a fair amount of straight-up pain. Because spirits can get pretty comfy within a body. And in the words of Dylan Thomas, it does not go gentle into the good night. So the man writhes and he twists, and finally he's freed of the bad spirit. Keep in mind, this is happening in the sanctuary, possibly with brand new carpet. Dealing with evil is messy. The result is so good. If all that people hear is our commercial, well, it might not necessarily be too persuasive. But it's a whole lot harder to dismiss the commercial if it's connected to fruits, the fruits of our faith. If in our actions they see things in us like respect for others, stewardship of the planet, compassion for the poor, intolerance of abuse, now we've moved from marketing to manufacturing. And the kingdom of God starts to come into view. We're told that we can't put our light under the bushel, and I think we can't keep the gospel under wraps either. A whole long time before Jesus, another fellow named Plato said this: the measure of a person is what he or she does with their power. Power that we all possess. And a more recent writer, Alice Walker, wrote the following: the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. End of quote. But we do. In the old days, as we sit in front of the television, maybe we heard this: we interrupt this program for a brief commercial break. Well, maybe we need to do the opposite. Maybe we interrupt this commercial break to get back to the program. To get to the good work of cultivating love, supporting justice, and fortifying truth. In short, the business of sending bad spirits packing and replacing them with very, very good ones. Maybe starting with ourselves as we cultivate peace. Perhaps during these last few moments of my commercial, you've been wandering off somewhere. That's fine. That happens. Because it may be somewhere more fruitful. Maybe you've begun to figure out some ways to bring a better spirit into this world. If so, don't hold back, because we need it. I don't care whether you heard a word of my sermon or not. If you got something that can cultivate a good spirit, let's have it. End of commercial.